Good evening, everybody. This is our...
Not yet.
Oh!
I saw a countdown. That was a big hour.
Yeah, it's slow tonight for some reason.
Oh, the world's on the internet.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Holy Week 101 class. Tonight we're going to be talking about all the different services that happen over the course of Holy Week. Before we start, Father, would you like to lead us with a prayer?
Yes. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who are in all places and through all things, treasury of blessings, and giver of life, come and dwell within us and cleanse us from every blemish, and save our souls, O Blessed One. The blessed glory, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever and forever.
Amen. So, one of the things that's really unique about this Holy Week is that we're all going to, most of us are going to be experiencing it from home. If you haven't already seen the Holy Week from Home packet, it really is very useful to helping bring as much of the things from the church into your home as possible.
Holy Week from Home is available on www.stelizabethga.org.
www.stelizabeth.ga.org.
No dot.
There's all sorts of activities you can print out and do with your family. But instead of focusing on the things that we've lost, there are things. Even though this pandemic really is a tragedy. And a lot of people have lost their lives, a lot of lives have been disrupted, people have lost their jobs. One of the things that is really to sort of like lemonades out of lemons, or one of the silver linings of all this is now that I really do believe, I'm an optimist. I think that most Orthodox Christians would love to experience all the services of Holy Week, but they just have other responsibilities. Kids are in sports. They have jobs to go to, so they can't attend the morning services during the week. Our Holy Week is different than most of the rest of the Christian world. The Orthodox Holy Week is next week. When everyone else is celebrating Holy Week this week, we're in our final week of Lent. And I really do believe that, given a choice, most people would want to be here for everything, but can't. And now we really do have the opportunity to celebrate everything. The commute to church is about as far as your computer is from your bed. And if you're upset that prayer was taken out of schools, well, have your kids watch the pre-sanctified liturgies and the royal hours before they do their schoolwork. We have an opportunity now to experience everything and to really take part in the whole cycle of services and to walk with Christ into the town of Bethany and into Jerusalem, and then follow him to the cross, and then meet him at the empty tomb, and we can experience all of it now. And in the theology of the church, really be present there with him at all of these different things. So even though we really do lose a lot by not being able to come here and not being able to have our baskets blessed all together, we also do gain things that we would not normally have the opportunity to experience. So with that in mind, being I'm an optimist, I really do think there's a lot of people that are going to be experiencing the whole cycle of Holy Week services for the first time. Now maybe some people have seen them before, and for those people I want to give them something extra that they may not have thought about while they're experiencing those cycles of services. So what we're going to do today is go through as much of as Holy Week as we can, and talk about each service that's celebrated in the morning and the evening. And if we run out of time, we'll continue with Friday, because there's a lot to talk about. You can probably go on for a whole month about this stuff. So the first holy day that I want to talk about is actually outside of Holy Week, because it sort of sets the stage and foreshadows at the events of Holy Week, and that's Lazarus Saturday. And at Lazarus Saturday, we see Jesus come to the town of Bethany, where his friend Lazarus had recently died. He'd been in the tomb for 4 days. In fact, some of the hymns that we sing tonight in pre-sanctified liturgies, if you were to celebrate a pre-sanctified liturgy, make reference to the fact that Lazarus is now being placed into the tomb, because 4 days later he will have been in the tomb for 4 days, and Christ comes and brings Lazarus back from the dead. And it's significant that the fact that it's 4 days shows Christ's authority over death, because in the ancient tradition, and for us now, the holy tradition is that the soul sort of hangs around the body for the first few days. After the soul is separated from the body, it kind of stays near its safe harbor of what it's familiar with for about a period of 3 days. But Lazarus is in the tomb for 4 days after the soul has already started to venture off and make its journey towards its final destination. And that's when Lazarus is raised from the tomb and the body and the soul are reunited. And we read in the Gospel that Lazarus' sisters said, "If you were here, my brother would not have died." That sort of in between faith, where I think most of us are, where they're not completely faithless. It's not, how could you allow this to happen, Lord? And they're not completely faithful, where they're like, fantastic, you're here, you're going to bring it back, everything's going to be okay. But sort of in between, they recognize that Christ has power over life and death, but they don't recognize that just because the person has died doesn't mean that they can't rise again on Christ's command. Doesn't mean that Christ can't bend the rules and bring somebody back before the general resurrection. So Lazarus is brought back from the dead, and that foreshadows, and in the hymns that we sing in Vespers and Liturgy for Lazarus Saturday, that foreshadows Christ's resurrection and the general resurrection. But the difference is that Lazarus is still going to die again. It's not like Christ's resurrection where he's resurrected and perfected. It's not like the resurrection that we all experience at the end of the world, where we're in a perfected form and we live forever with Christ in the kingdom. Lazarus is brought back from the dead, only to later die again. In some of the icons, we actually see that, making reference to how long he was in the tomb and the fact that he's not yet perfected. Some people are holding their mouths and sort of gagging when he comes out of the tomb because his body had already started to decay. He was in the tomb for so long. And Holy Tradition also states that Lazarus was so shocked by what he saw when he experienced death before he could enter paradise, before paradise was open, that he never really smiled again. He was constantly in a state of mourning for mankind and in sort of remembrance of what happens after death and what can happen after death. And then finally on Lazarus Saturday, we see there's the story of Martha and Mary. And this isn't necessarily in the Gospel readings. We see the story of Martha and Mary, where Martha is very busy, like most of us normally are during Holy Week. Martha's very busy, waiting on Christ and doing all these things and going to the kitchen and preparing food, but not really stopping to pay attention to what's going on, where we normally are. But this year we happen to get to be more like Mary, who waited at the foot of Christ and was patient and listened to what Christ had to say because she wasn't preoccupied. And fortunately, this Holy Week, we don't have to worry about being preoccupied because most of us are going to be working from home. This Holy Week, we really get to, if we want to, there's no reason to not be like Mary, Lazarus' sister Mary. And that leads us into Holy Week, or starting with the liturgy for Palm Sunday. And the general resurrection, the resurrection on the last day, is already being foreshadowed in the Tropar for Holy Week, or for Palm Sunday. The Tropar isn't so much about Christ's entrance into Jerusalem as it is about what he did the previous day. The Tropar says, Christ, you foreshadowed the resurrection of all when you brought Lazarus back from the grave. That same Tropar also compares us and says that we, like the children of Israel, we carry the symbols of victory. And I think Father's getting the whole Tropar now. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But that we are actually alongside the people in Jerusalem. We carry palm. If you go to liturgy on Palm Sunday, the priest is carrying palms and pussy willows because we are also there in Jerusalem, and we are like the people in Jerusalem, carrying the symbols of victory, of Christ's victory over death, as we welcome Christ into Jerusalem. And that aspect of us being present actually present there, not just remembering it like something that happened long, long ago, like it's a Civil War reenactment. The idea that we're mystically present at that event is something in the church called anamnesis, which roughly translates to commemoration or remembrance, but it really means that you're remembering it in a way where sort of internally you're feeling the same things that you would feel at that event, and you're really almost like totally engrossed in that event. It's like you're there with Christ as he's entering into Jerusalem. So when we get to tune in to the Palm Sunday liturgy, we get to be with Christ as he enters into Jerusalem in a sort of mystical kind of way. There's the emphasis, there's a real theme of Israel praising God as he enters as he enters into Jerusalem. And just like in Psalm 22, the psalm that Christ prayed while he was on the cross, "Oh God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Later on, he said the psalmist says that God is enthroned on the praises of Israel. That the praises of Israel are God's throne. And there's a story. Now the focus shifts from us and our sinfulness, and this focus shifts to glorifying God. There's a story that Archbishop Michael, a sermon that Archbishop Michael in the OCA used to talk about, where the donkey came back after the donkey that Christ rode on came back to the stable and was bragging to all the other animals and saying, "Oh man, I was so great today. You should have seen those people waving the palms in my face. I did such a good job." And then one of the other animals goes, "You stupid donkey. It wasn't about you. It was about the person that was riding it that you were carrying." So the shift in Holy Week now changes from the things that we're doing to now Christ is going to perform the ultimate act that saves mankind and that we have done nothing to deserve. That all of this preparation that we've been doing, in a way, when we get to Holy Week, really should seem like it pales into comparison to everything we're about to hear. That everything that we did is like very minuscule. All this fasting and extra prayers is really minuscule to the great work that Christ is about to accomplish. And he accomplishes that work over the course of a whole week, much like how he created the earth over the course of 7 days and then rested. He restores creation, he renews creation over the course of a week, and then rests in the tomb at the very end. So we see that the fact that God is now at work. He's performing the act that's going to save mankind. After the liturgy, now we're on Sunday morning. We had the liturgy on Sunday morning for Palm Sunday. We're now into Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. Here, we'll be celebrating, it's 1 p.m. with Bridegroom Matins, right? They're about, okay. I don't mean to hold you to anything.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I think that's right.
I think that's what it said in the book. Matins is the sunrise service, typically. And there's a Bridegroom Matins that's only celebrated during Holy Week. That it's called the Bridegroom Matins because it references Christ's parable of the wise and foolish virgins. That some of the virgins were waiting for the bridegroom to come, and some of them did not bring enough oil, and others brought enough oil for the bridegroom to come. The bridegroom was delayed, and some had fallen asleep because they didn't have enough oil left, while the ones that brought more than enough were able to enter the bridal chamber with the bridegroom. So there's this theme of being watchful and prepared for what's about to happen later in the week. That we want to be like the wise virgins who were prepared and were able to enter into the bridal chamber, and not like the foolish virgins who did not have enough oil. The service constantly, there's a lot of tropars and steaks that compare us to the foolish virgins, that we have no oil, and our bridal garment we're not able to enter the bridal chamber with Christ and asking him to have mercy on us, that we're able to enter the bridal chamber with him. These services also, and they're celebrated every morning, Monday through Wednesday, also reference another parable that happens immediately afterwards about the 10 talents, where the servants have talents distributed to them, and then their interest comes due, and some servants hid their talents out of fear, and other servants invested their talents. So there's also a theme of, just like how there's the theme of anticipation in reference to the wise and foolish virgins, there's that same theme of anticipation and watchfulness in reference to the parables of the talents. One of the hymns, one of the verses says, "Come, O faithful, let us zealously labor for the Lord. Let us zealously, for he entrusts riches to his servants. Let us multiply the talent of grace. Let one gain wisdom by doing good. Let one serve with splendor. Let the faithful share the faith with the unenlightened. Let another share their goods with the poor." So that we've all God has invested in each of us, and invested hopefully more in us during Lent, but that those investments are eventually going to come due, and we're either prepared and we're watchful, or we're unwatchful and we're unprepared for the final judgment. So on Monday and Tuesday we see Christ denounce the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then we also see him wither the fig tree that did not bear fruit, and he's both referencing that the old covenant is now about to be abolished and fulfilled in the new covenant that's going to be bought with his blood at the end of the week. On Wednesday, Holy Tradition holds that Christ probably rested from the work that he had done previously in the week. And on Wednesday is also when we commemorate Lazarus' sister anointing Christ's feet for burial. And we also see in that same gospel the stage being set, and we sing about this in some of the hymns later on Thursday. The stage is being set for Christ's betrayal. The oil that Christ's feet was anointed with was very, very fine oil. And Lazarus' sister did the proper thing and gave her best things to God by anointing his body for burial. But Judas was offended and he claimed, because he thought, that money could have been sold and given to the poor. But in the Gospel of John, we hear that it was really because he loved money, and he didn't like seeing this thing that could turn a profit go what he considered a waste. So we begin seeing that stage set that now Judas's greed is going to take over, and it becomes a common theme on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We see the hymns making reference to Judas's greed and how it blinded him to what he was doing. So on Wednesday morning, you'll typically have either a Matin service or a pre-sanctified service celebrated. And then on Wednesday evening is when we celebrate the unction service. It's a service where oil, just like commemorating Christ's anointing, if it's celebrated in its entirety, and it was one year when I was at seminary in the cathedral, if it's celebrated in its entirety, you have 7 priests come together to pray over the oil. There are 7 Gospels and 7 epistles read, each making reference to different instances of Christ's healing ministry. The whole theme of the service is that Christ came to heal the sick both spiritually and physically. The oil is blessed. There's one point in the service where the gospel is held over the oil, and all the priests have a hand on the gospel. And then the oil is blessed, and then that unction oil is used later to anoint. The faithfuls are anointed at the service, and then that unction oil is used to anoint the sick later. And that sacrament of holy unction is not reserved just for those who are dying. It's not, in Orthodoxy, it's not considered like a last rite. That is for anybody who's sick, even if they're sick they got like the common cold. There's no reason they can't be anointed with the oil. It's for the healing of, and we've heard Father talk about it a lot over this whole Lenten period. It's for the healing of both the soul and the body. The body may not always be healed. It's only if God wills it. But that sacrament, those prayers are always answered, and the person's soul is always healed. Because when you're sick, is a time when your soul is very, very vulnerable because you're cut off from your community. you're lonely, and the outcome may not be necessarily look very good, and you're anxious. And those are all instances when we're most vulnerable to the attacks of the devil, because we're anxious and because we're weak and because we're cut off. And it's Wednesday night where we bless the unction oil.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that I've told people the past few years that it's really beautiful to participate in that service because all throughout the year people get sick, and that is the oil that they are taken and blessed with when they're in their home or in the hospital and they can't come to be a part of the church. So when you come to that service and you participate in it, and you can't come this year, but you could certainly participate with your prayers through the streaming on Facebook that has been offered. When you participate in that unction service with your prayers, it's kind of like in a way, you are participating in every sick call that the priest makes throughout the rest of that year, because if you weren't there at that service to say amen, then they're not going to have the service to bless the oil. And so people often will ask the priest, how is so-and-so doing? We haven't seen them in a while. This is a way where you can really participate in that ministry of caring and visiting for the sick, because you have been there when that oil was blessed. So.
And the other thing that's brought to the sick is going to be consecrated the following morning when we celebrate a Vespers service. There's a Vesperal Divine Liturgy, so if you've ever been to Vespers, it begins with the priest in front of the closed royal doors, and there's one point where the deacon comes out, or the priest, in the absence of a deacon, comes out with a censer. There's an entrance, we sing Gladsome Light. But there, on Thursday morning, that at Gladsome Light, the Gospel's read, and then we celebrate a liturgy commemorating the Last Supper, and remembering how Judas's greed led someone who was a friend of Christ down the wrong path to betray him. Now, it's a Vesper service which commemorates the start of the day, which in the Orthodox tradition is sunset, but it's celebrated in the morning. There's a lot of different explanations for this. Some of them, some people will say, well, it's God's time, and that reality is, jumbled and suspended. My favorite explanation was given by our spirituality professor and our church history professor, Father Lawrence Barringer, said that, it's a monastic service, and if you want to celebrate the monastic cycle, no one would be in church because some of them have to be celebrated at 3 a.m. So we're going to celebrate them the next day, just so that, the idea is to bring people into the church, to celebrate these things and to walk through Passion Week with Christ. And if we're reading the 12 Gospels, which we do in the evening, on Thursday, if we're reading them when they're supposed to be read, it's going to be 4 o'clock in the morning and no one's going to be awake yet. So it's just for practicality's sake, we celebrate them so that people can be there to experience these things, just like all of you can be there to experience them from your laptop or TV this week.
I'll toss in on that too, to say part of it is I've always looked at it and thought we are so excited during that week that you're doing the Vespers that should have been done in the evening in the morning, because we can't wait for the resurrection to come.
Yeah.
So we're eagerly anticipating, and so this is totally not historically based in any way, so I hope I don't offend anybody. But I like to think maybe sometime, a very long time ago, there was a bishop or a monk or a priest somewhere that said, all right, I just can't wait anymore, let's just do this now. And then somebody said, that's a good idea, and that's kind of how we started.
It's definitely, we don't wait very long to start referencing the resurrection. We start referencing it as soon as Lent is over. We're in Palm Sunday and on Lazarus Saturday, we're already talking about Pascha. So there's definitely more than enough reason to say that's.
We eagerly anticipate everything in the church. With everything that we do, Lent is an anticipation.
There's Christmas hymns that are already referencing the death and resurrection of Christ. So There's absolutely
It's
no
what
reason.
we wait for all year. So like we're just basically skipping a couple hours of the day because we've been waiting all year for this day, and we don't want to. It's like a kid that wants to open his presents on Christmas Eve.
And the beautiful thing about Orthodoxy is that, like, all of these explanations are right. You know, we can't, you know, there's Orthodoxy doesn't say, well, this is the one explanation and that's the certified Orthodox explanation. Yeah, it's on God's time, and now, like, the natural order is like overthrown, and we can't wait to get there, but it's also practical to do it at, you know, they're all correct. But the point is that the services are celebrated at different, Vespers is celebrated in the morning, and then we have a Matin service in the evening on Thursday. But there's a theme of irony throughout the Vespers service in the morning on Holy Thursday. The irony that the natural order is now in upheaval, and things are happening the opposite of how they would logically be happening.
Can I jump in on
yes,
this
go for
real quick? I don't mean to keep cutting
That's
off.
fine.
But this service is usually not super well attended.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, in my experience, throughout my life, whether I was an altar boy or a seminarian or a priest, this has not been the most well attended service of the Holy Week schedule. As I have grown older, it's so beautiful and touching, and it's worth coming to. And in this case, I love what you said, Deacon, about how there's really no reason to not attend all of these things. We have such a great opportunity to take a step back from our life and to participate in the services of Holy Week from our home. And if we can't even do it from our home, then we might be in a lot of trouble. And I don't mean that to make anybody feel guilty, but if we can't devote a little extra time during Holy Week to the services from our homes, we might be in trouble. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that. But my point is that this service is beautiful, and you read the gospel where, and at the Last Supper, where Christ tells the disciples that one of them is going to betray them, and then they're all saying no, 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 and Peter says no, and Christ tells them, you're going to deny me 3 times. And you read this gospel, and you go through the first denial of Peter, and the second denial of Peter, and the third, and then it says that he wept bitterly. And when I'm reading this, it's honestly very hard to not choke up if you are really taking yourself to that place, like the deacon was talking about with the anamnesis. If you're really there and you're really experiencing this as Peter experienced it, which you don't have to try very hard to think about, because every time we sin and every time we do something that we know is not right, every time that we treat somebody unkindly, even, we're doing the same thing. We're denying Christ, just like Peter did. And so all the time we could think that we're just like Peter, like, oh, no, never me, it wouldn't be me, Christ, I would never do that. And how often do we actually do that? And so I personally don't have to try very hard to feel as Peter felt in that moment, because I know that I do it all the time. And so this is, as you get into this Thursday service too, you're really getting into the events where the passion is becoming real, because Peter has been there all along. Peter's there at the Transfiguration. Peter is walking on water. Peter sees Lazarus risen from the dead, and so of course I'm not going to deny, and then all of a sudden he's denying. And it's extremely powerful, and I think it sets that stage for us to really experience the rest of Holy Week. It really is where you start to see Christ's suffering, because as Peter is denying him, that's like your friend just slapping you in the face and turning his back against you in a moment when you need him the most. And so to me, that's where I really start to feel that, okay, this is all getting very, very serious now, and building up towards the cross and all the things that come along with it.
And there's a moment in one of the hymns in that Vespers service, the Vesperal Divine Liturgy service. It says that Judas arranged the betrayal of Christ with the Eucharist still warm in his mouth. That, he had just celebrated the very first Divine Liturgy, in a sense, and the whole time he's thinking, I'm going to go out and get paid. And there's this there's this theme of just, it just speaks to the fact that if you don't want, people will talk about unanswered prayers, and if you don't want the sacrament to work, and if you don't want the prayer to work because you're focusing on something else, it's, God's not going to force it on you. Judas, arranged the betrayal with the Eucharist still in his mouth. It's kind of, it makes me think of if you want to pray for safety and then you do all these things to be, you're focused on how you're going to do all these things to put yourself in harm's way, it's, God is not going to force anything on you that you don't want, that you don't really want. And if we want to receive the Eucharist worthily and focused on what we're receiving, unlike Judas, who, while he was receiving the Eucharist, was already plotting to betray Christ. The hymns also say he calculated the price of the myrrh, but did not consider the price of you who are priceless. That, yesterday we read the gospel about how Judas was so concerned about the price of the myrrh and how that would better serve the poor, but the next day he doesn't stop for a second to consider the price of his friend's life before he's about to go turn Christ over to the authorities.
And this too is the same idea, of Peter's betrayal. Judas's is even worse, obviously. But Judas is there all along, and one of those hymns says, I don't know if maybe it's in the evening and you're going to talk about it, and I'm jumping the gun, but are you going to talk about the one where he's talking about, did I treat you differently than the rest of the apostles? Did I love you any less?
I think so. I was good, but it's okay.
No, you could hit on it, because I was thinking of something different anyway. I said this, and I've had somebody say to me before, I don't like being compared to Judas, because I made this statement once. How often do we receive the Eucharist and fresh in our mouth we're gossiping about people in the church? And that's the same kind of betrayal. We're betraying somebody that's made in the image and likeness of Christ. We're sinning against them with our words, with the Eucharist still warm in our mouth. And how often do we do that? Probably every single time after we receive the Eucharist, we go next door to coffee hour and are not acting as saintly as we should. And so it just is a warning for us to take everything seriously. How easy that slippery slope is to go from a disciple to somebody who betrays. And again, this is where this kind of part of the Passion, I think, is far too often overlooked by far too many people, to think that, when you think of the Passion, you think of the cross and the nails and the crown of thorns and all of the physical kind of beatings. But the reality is, and I think anybody that has experienced any kind of personal betrayal in their life, that is far more hurtful than any kind of physical injury. Maybe not, maybe that's taking it too far. But it's certainly extremely painful. And there's no question that hurt, and that's part of Christ's Passion, is being betrayed by the people who are closest to him.
And at the end of that liturgy, just like we were talking about in the unction service, the oil set aside for the sick, there's the reserved sacrament is then the communion that's consecrated at that liturgy is placed in the tabernacle. And then that's distributed to the sick and distributed to people who are shut in their home. We can really say that Christ is in our midst when we're in this building, because the lamb that's consecrated on Thursday morning, on Holy Thursday morning, is kept in this building. When we participate in that liturgy, again, we help serve the sick, but we also help bring Christ into our community, and his body and blood is there for the rest of the year. And then in the evening, we celebrate a Matins service. So it's technically the service for Friday at sunrise. And it's the service detailing Christ's Passion in its entirety. The Orthodox Church does not differentiate between the different parts and phases of his Passion. There's the Passion. The Gospels start with the high priestly prayer that Christ prays before when he says, Father, the hour has come, glorify me that you may be glorified. The Gospels detail everything from the Last Supper through to the crucifixion, through to Christ being taken down from the cross. And the hymns, one of the hymns that Father was talking about with being sort of sung to Judas in a way, did Christ treat you any differently? Is sung there, kind of again comparing that irony that Judas walked with the disciples. He was someone who was closest to Christ, and he was given all the things that the other disciples were given, but he still betrayed him. And one interesting point in this service is after the first bells are rung during the service until the first gospel reading where the verse that Christ yielded up his spirit is read. And then instead, there's either no bells or there's clackers used instead, because now we're in a period of mourning, that something almost completely unspeakable has happened, and we're not ringing the bells anymore. Some churches will use clackers in the procession because it sounds like a hammer driving a nail into the cross. And that the 12 gospel service is really it's another service that if you haven't experienced, you do walk through the entire passion from the theology in it that's in John about who Christ is and what he's about to do, and he's consoling the disciples and saying that, you're not going to see me for a little while, but then again you'll see me, and he perceives that they're troubled by this, and he says this is like a woman. He compares what he's about to do to a woman going into labor, that you're grieved before it happens, but then life is brought into the world and you forget that grief in that joy. And that's a theme that we see later in the service, or later in the week when we start celebrating the Resurrection Matins, that it's all this grief is now suddenly transformed into joy, and all this darkness is suddenly transformed into light. And typically, there's 12 people in front of you'll have 12 parishioners holding a candle in front of the Gospels, and as each Gospel is read, one person blows out their candle and goes back to their pew until there's only one candle left at the end, and that's blown out, and the person returns to their pew. And I don't know if there's any significance in it to the 12 apostles, but it really does, again, that betrayal, it really does speak to the fact that they all, with the exception of John, they all left him. That when he was left to suffer, he was left to his friends. Even if they didn't betray him actively, they all ran, and that he was left alone with his mother and with the myrrh-bearing women and with John, with the Apostle John, to suffer for the sins of the world. And it really is just, and that is the moment where now we're completely focused on the crucifixion and the passion. We are at 7:30, so should we?
Well, why don't we're going to pick up on Friday,
yeah.
And why don't we, if you want to tie up Thursday evening,
okay.
If you have anything else you want to add to it, but why don't we say we'll continue with talking about Good Friday on this Friday,
yeah.
So it'll be a week out
Yeah.
for those events, and then the rest of Holy Week to kind of get people motivated
Yeah.
right before it begins.
So to tie up Holy Thursday, on Thursday evening, we're already moving into the actual crucifixion. So that the crucifixion story in its wholeness is on Thursday night, and then on Friday we have the royal hours, the burial service, and we'll be back here on Friday to talk about those and to talk about what we do on Holy Saturday. Do you want to close with a prayer?
Go ahead, John.
Oh, yes.
We have a comment on Facebook, and I don't know if it's not really framed as a question. I'm just going to read it and let you comment on it. Troy says, a brief explanation of this big picture view of the services would be helpful to some of us newbies to read immediately before each service. So,
Okay.
not quite.
Yeah, to answer to Troy's question, I don't know if in that Holy Week at Home packet there might be a little bit of
I
explanation.
think there is really, where I went into like a lot of details, I think that one just says has, it's like, this is the purpose of the service.
Yeah.
So if that person's still tuned in, I don't know if they're still tuned in, but they can start with the Holy Week at home. But if they're not tuned in, or if they aren't able to find that packet, I could always at the very end start doing a big
Can we
picture.
post a link? Can I put a link in
Yeah,
there?
it's right. It's on the homepage of our website. I put a link to that
Okay.
up there. And also, for Troy and for anybody else, what I will do for this Sunday's bulletin is do a little bit of a brief explanation of each service for those who will be following along from home. Starting with, I'll start with Monday's services, since it will be too late to get that for the rest of those services that will have happened for Lazarus Saturday.
This is where I really wish I had a handout, because I feel like it would be, like, I'm just kind of rambling through it too, so I feel like it's very easy if you're watching on the internet to be like, what day is this?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's a good question, and I think we have the resources ready to kind of put that out very easily.
Were there any other questions or comments?
No, that's it. You have a lot of hearts and crosses and a smiley face.
All right.
May the blessing of the Lord be upon all of you, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christ is among us.
Yes,
It is now and forever shall be.